J.W. Anderson is one of the most successful living designers in the world, if not the most successful designer still to head his namesake brand since the rise of Alexander McQueen. But how did he get there? And how did one man gain so much power in the industry? Actually, the beginning of his brand is very much a mystery. His own website says the brand was established in 2008. However, his career actually began immediately after he graduated from the London College of Fashion in September 2007, as he produced this Spring/Summer 08 collection that was sponsored by On/Off. And the collection was successful too, even managing to get a piece of jewelry onto the cover of Vogue Italia. However, on Grailed I found this leather jacket claiming to be from Autumn/Winter 2007. I can't place the jacket in another collection of his, and it does have the correct label for the time. So my best guess is that this is a sample to show On/Off to get the sponsorship for the first catwalk show, or perhaps it's something from his graduate collection, hence the number under the collar. The next appearance of the brand was only a few months later in Autumn/Winter 08, when he produced a lookbook of some really interesting garments inspired by Rasputin and his connections, as well as the hugely famous artist Louise Bourgeois, which interestingly is the first direct reference to an artist I could find for JW. He's known to be a huge art lover, so often uses artworks, especially photography, as references in his work, and has even had a solo art exhibition himself. So it's interesting to see that art directly inspired his designs from only the second collection. The collection was also notable for the interesting accessories used throughout, especially this ring, photographed by Susie Bubble, of a real beetle encapsulated in resin, something that was often noted by bloggers at the time and was popular with singer-songwriter Patrick Wolf, who was seen wearing the collection a couple of times. His Spring/Summer 09 was equally a massive success, so it was no surprise that it was in the following year, when he was picked up by Fashion East, J.W. Anderson joined the fund for Autumn/Winter 09, while the show still had a spot on Women's Wear Week, before London Collection's Men came to fruition in 2012. The Autumn/Winter 09 series was a special one for Fashion East because they decided that that season would be the first to champion installations that one could walk around a bit like a gallery. J.W. Anderson picked up on this and showed both on the catwalk as well as in an installation. But as a collection, it was incredibly controversial, and he's gone on to say that the response to this collection made him want to quit the fashion industry completely. He really was the first designer to gender-bend menswear in this way, effectively showing truly genderless clothing on men. Of course, the trend of androgyny was around at the time, but it was androgyny for women, not for men. So for him to develop on that idea in this way was truly groundbreaking. Spring/Summer 2010 showed a much darker palette, which was fairly popular, but it was his Autumn/Winter 2010 that absolutely exploded his brand into the mainstream. He showed his kind of punk aesthetic, something you would never really associate with the J.W. Anderson brand now. I cannot explain how huge this collection was within the fashion sphere for such a small designer. Literally everyone I knew was talking about this collection as the standout from the whole season. Yes, because of how fresh the collection felt in a sea of minimalistic, painfully 2010s fashion, but also because it was one of the first collections to be broadcast live with Days Digital and immediately available for purchase on Okini. I have no idea how he managed to pull this off as such a small brand, but it was incredibly successful and was picked up by Selfridges, who I think exclusively held the collection. I can't find any reference to this online, but I remember it was in the basement floor of Selfridges, and I travelled all the way to London alone at either 7 or 8 years old to see it. My parents never found out, but I was so ecstatic to see it in real life, and I remember these skinny trousers being so ridiculously skinny that they actually fit me as a literal child. This collection has such incredible sentimentality to me, and I'm so happy to report that it was a huge hit for fashion media at the time as well. But something very interesting to me is that to the New York Times, he said that this was the first time he didn't over-intellectualize his work, and that's why he thinks it was successful. If you watch any interview with J.W. Anderson now, I think this is something he's brought through even to this day, because he fumbles over words often, and he says filler words like "you know" a lot. So I don't necessarily believe that he reads into his work the way myself and other fashion journalists do. This is not a criticism whatsoever, and instead I see it as more poetic, allowing others to read into the work and understand it in a more personal way to them. He actually has trouble drawing his designs physically because he's dyslexic, so when designing he prefers to work on the body. Actually, because of this, if you watch the behind the scenes of him designing a collection, it's almost like watching John Galliano at Dior Couture working house, just because they have the same drapery style, although JW is much calmer, definitely. And yes, I know draping is very common for women's wear, but this is menswear, and traditionally menswear is worked out from patterns, not from draping. So it's very likely the reason he continues to be able to really push the silhouettes for menswear is the draping. So his punk-free aesthetic continued into his androgynous Spring-Summer 11 collection, and unlike Autumn-Winter 2010, he was no longer bound to sell exclusively with Selfridges, which meant that his designs were in most luxury department stores in London, though I remember specifically that Liberty's had the largest collection, and that the prices were upsettingly high for me when I was a child desperately trying to buy just anything from the collection. The only thing I managed to scrape my pocket money together for was this t-shirt. I keep it safely at home, and it is literally my most prized fashion possession that I have, even though it's now completely destroyed with how much I wore it out. The collection as a whole was cleaner than the collection that had preceded it, but I remember specifically the people in London loving the doily applique pieces and these boots, which everybody wanted, but I don't remember ever being for sale. Basically, JW Anderson was on top of the world. Everyone was looking at his brand, and it was the clear star of Fashion East, if not London menswear at the time. This is when underwear brand Sunspel rapidly appointed him as creative director in 2010, meaning he was quickly working on their Spring-Summer 11 line. This is the first time that he explicitly designed women's wear, although the mainline Spring-Summer 11 show was shown in the women's wear London Fashion Week days. There really wasn't a menswear day yet, so that really was his only option if he wanted promotion, and even JW Anderson himself said that Spring-Summer 11 was more the idea of a woman borrowing clothes from her boyfriend than explicitly designing for women. So the mainline Spring-Summer 11 was definitely more genderless than women's wear, whereas the Sunspel collection was definitely clearly women's wear. He learnt a lot with his time at Sunspel and really projected the brand forward, upping sales and improving on brand image easily. But definitely more eyes were still on his mainline brand, in which he was changing things up yet again. With the new creative director of an 150-year-old brand money, he was able to expand on his mainline brand and for the first time split women's wear and menswear into their own separate shows. The women's wear and menswear both were a big hit, and the discourse at the time was that these two collections could be that of a couple who were dating and sharing a wardrobe. I think these collections as a pair were really smart for that reason. They both shared several pieces like the shoes, the coats, the jumpers, so it very much was like the same concept from the Spring-Summer 11 show, but this time in a differently androgynous way. It's also in this collection we first see more key elements of the JW Anderson brand that he is loved for today. Unusual silhouettes, clean lines, super luxurious fabrics, which ties his brand vision of today well with his first few collections. You can clearly see a progression in his work here if you just ignore the Autumn-Winter 2010 and Spring-Summer 2011 collections, which don't have the same obvious link. This is the final time he changes up the brand aesthetic so drastically, which is probably the best choice from a branding perspective, and he brings back the same idea of showing similar, if not identical, clothes in the men's and women's wear shows in many future seasons as well. But this return to his original work with a new, sleeker silhouette clearly worked. More eyes were on JW than ever before, and he picked up a whopping 53 garment collection with additional stationery with Topshop. That was an absolute smash hit at the time. Literally, it was the #1 selling collaboration at the time, and one of the standout pieces was even spotted on Alexa Chung, who was wearing the Bat mascot knit from the collection while also at the height of her fashion fame. And so the idea of mascots for each collection was also added into the JW Anderson brand's key signatures. The Topshop collaboration was so obviously going to be a hit too that they had renewed the contract for 2013 before his collection was even fully realized in 2012. His collections at the time, Spring-Summer 12, Autumn-Winter 12, and Spring-Summer 13, were all extremely commercially successful and critically acclaimed as well, causing discussions and arguments amongst the fashionable people in London at the time because of how divisive the collections were. Many people loved them and many people hated them. For Autumn-Winter 13, he launched his first advertising campaign and was featured all over the magazines at the time. He even won awards at the British Fashion Awards twice, the first being the Emerging Talent Award in ready-to-wear in 2012, and the second being the New Establishment Award in 2013. He was an industry darling, linking young people to the old magazines in a way they really needed at the time. He was a refresher for the industry as a whole, even if his design style wasn't to everyone's taste. So, having the establishment notice him so strongly, the big brands started to take notice as well. So, it was in September 2013 that he was announced to be the new creative director of Loewe after a deal that also saw him sell a minor stake in his namesake brand to LVMH, the owners of Loewe. This was a really shocking move at the time. Loewe was known as a brand, sure, but they were known for being very old, a bit stuffy, not very fashionable, not very modern whatsoever. But what they did have was quality. Their leather goods are known to be some of the best in the industry and were direct rivals to Hermes because of how excellent the quality of their hides were. Although, because they weren't particularly famous, their price point was much lower and their desirability was also very low. Both things they knew J.W. Anderson, who himself had a similar price point, would excel at improving. It is no understatement to say that the first Loewe collection under JW alone was enough to completely transform the brand in the eyes of the public. The brand got a full overhaul in their demographic, aesthetic, including their logo, all within one collection, and it was widely talked about. Their stockist list absolutely exploded, and they began showing in places like Dover Street Market and Corso Como, really any and all designer department stores, because it was so incredibly successful, and looking at the collection, it's very easy to see why. With the success of the first collection alone, he was able to secure a long contract with Loewe that is almost getting to 10 years long now, which meant that he was once again able to add more funds to funnel into his namesake brand. This time, this meant an evolution in leather goods because of the connections that Loewe afforded him. Actually, even after he changed up suppliers, he didn't have a hit bag until menswear Spring-Summer 14 with these bucket bags. They sold really well across men and women and continued to be sold with variations for a few years, so even though they've easily been eclipsed in popularity, I'd say this was his first really successful bag. However, that doesn't hold a bar on the logo bag that launched for pre-fall 2015 as a retail piece. While the logo bag was successful at marketing the brand to the masses, it was quickly surpassed by the Pierce bag. The Pierce bag was first seen in pre-fall 2016 and went seriously viral. All the fashion people of London had a Pierce bag, and it went on to be the best-selling product from the mainline J.W. Anderson brand. While I'm skipping a lot from this period, which is really the height of his success, the most successful pieces were these trousers, these Loewe elephant bags, these Loewe puzzle bags, these neck scarves, these penis keyrings, and the hugely successful collaboration that he still produces to this day with Uniqlo that has now spanned 5 years. Also in this time, he's won several more awards, including being the first designer ever to win both the Men's and Women's Wear Designer of the Year in the same year from the British Fashion Council in 2015, and then he once again won the Women's Wear Designer of the Year in 2017. So at this point, he is a hard-hitting brand name for anyone interested in fashion. He's almost like a gateway designer for people starting to take an interest, however, that would soon change. The brand would hit new heights of fame, turning them into a household name after Harry Styles was seen in this cardigan. The cardigan was first seen in Spring-Summer 2020 menswear collection and was worn by Harry Styles just for a rehearsal performance before his spot on the Today Show. Yet, the internet, specifically TikTok, went nuts for it. Vogue notes how the hashtag Harry Styles cardigan had over 300,000 views alone, and of course it's gone up since then. Of course, it's good design, but I don't think that was the reason for its virality. I think it was likely more due to the fact that the pandemic was in full swing and people needed comfy clothes to lounge around in, so when this luxurious-looking cardigan was shown, it hit exactly what consumers wanted. And not only did they want it, but they could make it themselves for very cheap, now that they have all of this free time, being that lockdown started in April a few months earlier. The amount of DIY videos I saw going over the knits of this cardigan was extreme, and even the JW Anderson team themselves got on the trend by sharing full instructions on how to recreate the look, and with releasing this YouTube video showing step by step how the original version was made, emphasizing on the trend and bringing interest to the brand overall, landing him the infamous Converse collaborations. The series of collaborations he had with Converse were all wildly successful in their own right, but this shoe in particular, a year after the initial release, Converse stole the design, removed the JW Anderson tag, and continued to sell the design without the man that created it. He was obviously outraged by this and publicly condemned Converse on his Instagram for it. Despite this, JW is still at the absolute height of his success, even though he is still a pretty divisive designer due to his design style that many people just don't like. But he will always be remembered by history as one of the greats. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to see the rise and rise of Vivienne Westwood next week, or check out Martine Rose, Christopher Shannon, or Kid Super here.